One quiet night, when the stars were shining in the dark sky, a young guy named Min arrived at his new home in the US. He had left the chaos of Laos behind, looking for peace and safety. But the calm he was hoping for turned into something terrifying. On his first night in the new house, Min had a bad dream. He was back in Laos, running through a jungle under a blood-red sky. He could hear his family crying out in the distance. Suddenly, a creepy figure popped up from the shadows. Its eyes shone with a nasty kind of evil, and a twisted smile stretched across its pale face. Min woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. In the days that followed, the nightmares kept coming, getting worse each time. Min saw familiar faces turn into scary monsters, their hands reaching out for him with long, sharp fingers. Fear took hold of him, and he started avoiding sleep, scared of what he'd see when he closed his eyes. Word about the creepy nightmares spread through the refugee community. Other young folks reported similar dreams filled with threatening shadows and creepy whispers. Every night, more people were scared, and an uneasy fear settled over everyone. The hope of a fresh start was fading away fast, all due to this invisible horror. Min tried talking to his parents, but they said it was just his imagination and a sign of his past trauma. But he felt deep down that something much darker was hiding in his dreams. Something old and evil that thrived on their fear and suffering. Every time Min shut his eyes, he braced himself for a world of terror, where reality and nightmares blurred together. With each night, the darkness around him felt thicker and more suffocating, as he desperately tried to escape the monster haunting his dreams. Min wasn't alone in this. Soon, other refugees began sharing their own frightening stories. In every corner and house, the tales were the same. Vivid nightmares that just kept getting scarier. People woke up screaming, sweating, eyes wide with fear. There was Mrs. Lee, who dreamed of invisible hands trying to choke her, while voices whispered about eternal suffering. Young Thou saw his little brother dragged into a dark abyss, his screams echoing until he woke up. The community was in shock, the fear growing like a shadow that covered everyone. With each new story, the feeling of helplessness grew. No one knew what to do or how to fight it. The darkness felt evil, like it fed off their shared fear. Days turned into a cycle of night terrors and daytime exhaustion. People started avoiding sleep, hanging out all night to keep the horror at bay. But even when they were awake, the fear didn't leave them. Min could see the same dread on everyone's faces. It felt like something invisible was always there, watching. Kids cried for no reason. Adults became paranoid, and no one felt safe, even in the daylight. The creepy figures Min saw in his dreams started showing up in other people's stories too. Shadows with glowing eyes and cruel smiles that seemed to dig into everyone's deepest fears. The details were eerily similar. A presence that materialized in the darkest parts of their minds, ready to mess with their sanity. The community was about to crumble. This invisible horror was slowly tearing them apart, night after night. Min figured something had to change. But how do you fight an enemy that exists only in dreams? Panic turned into despair, and despair morphed into crippling fear. The nights dragged on with no end in sight, and Min was scared there was no escape from the nightmare they were all stuck in. Amid the chaos, a hopeful figure appeared. Dr. Alan Parker, a dedicated doctor who heard about the weird happenings in the refugee neighborhood. With genuine curiosity and a real desire to help, he started investigating the nightmares. Dr. Parker began talking to the residents, gathering their terrifying dream stories. He listened carefully, jotting down every detail about the shadows chasing them. He looked serious, but inside, he felt fear grow with each tale. Something really sinister was going on, something that made no sense at all. Min was one of the first to share his story. When he talked about the dark figure chasing him, he saw a flicker of understanding in Dr. Parker's eyes. The doctor had heard similar accounts before. There was a pattern forming, a connection emerging from the shadows. Dr. Parker went back to his research, looking for anything that could explain these deadly nightmares. He dug up old medical articles mentioning sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, which talked about young, healthy individuals dying mysteriously during their sleep. This made his investigation urgent. He knew lives were at stake, but it wasn't just in books that he found answers. One especially dark night. While going over his notes, Dr. Parker had a nightmare of his own. He found himself in a room filled with shadows, and a blurry figure came towards him, its eyes shining with wickedness. He woke up gasping, feeling the same terror the refugees faced night after night. With a renewed sense of purpose, Dr. Parker decided to seek help from less conventional sources. He spoke with elders and shamans in the community, people who knew old legends about evil spirits. The answers were chilling. A malevolent force was attacking those who had already suffered so much, feeding on fear and despair. As the investigation went on, Dr. Parker and Min teamed up to find a way to fight back. But with each new thing they discovered, the fear seemed to grow. Like the entity knew they were getting close to the truth. Min's nights became darker, and the feeling of being watched was almost too much to handle. The doctor knew they had to act fast. Time was running short, and the mysterious deaths could start happening at any time. The invisible terror was still tormenting the community, and with each night, the darkness felt closer, more suffocating, like a nightmare they couldn't escape. As Dr. Parker and Min delved deeper into the investigation, they discovered something disturbing. The entity haunting the refugees' dreams had a connection to past traumas. It was as if each person suffering from the nightmares was being chosen, selected by their own emotional scars and deepest fears. Min began to recall his childhood in Laos, the horrors he witnessed during the war. The memories he had buried deeply now resurfaced, mingling with the nightmares that haunted him. He realized the entity was using his own fears against him, turning them into deadly weapons. Meanwhile, Dr. Parker continued his research, uncovering old stories about vengeful spirits that could enter the dreams of the living. They were known for their ability to torture their victims with terrifying visions and eventually take their lives. The connection between the nightmares and the mysterious deaths was becoming clearer. The entity was not just a figure from ancient folklore. It was real and was hunting the refugees in their most vulnerable moments, during sleep. Dr. Parker felt a chill down his spine as he realized the magnitude of what they were facing. Min and Dr. Parker knew they had to confront the entity, but how to fight something that existed only in the world of dreams? They began to look for ancient methods of spiritual protection, talismans and rituals that could serve as a barrier between the refugees and the terror surrounding them. Each night became a test of courage and endurance. Min faced his deepest fears as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation with the entity. He knew he could no longer run. He had to confront his own pain and find a way to turn it into strength. As the terror intensified, Min and Dr. Parker realized they were entering the territory of the unknown. The line between the world of dreams and reality began to blur, and the only certainty they had was that the final battle was approaching quickly. The fate of the community depended on their courage and determination to face the evil that had haunted them for so long. The night of the final confrontation arrived. Min and Dr. Parker gathered with the community's elders and shamans, preparing for the ritual that could banish the malevolent entity. The air was filled with tension and fear, but also with a fierce determination to end the terror that had haunted their lives. At the center of a protection circle drawn with sacred ash powder, Min closed his eyes and plunged into his nightmare once more. He was back in the jungle of Laos, but this time he was not alone. By his side, Dr. Parker and the shamans fought alongside him, their combined energies in a final desperate attempt to resist the entity. The shadows twisted round them, whispering promises of pain and despair. The sinister figure that men feared more than anything appeared before them, its eyes gleaming with ancient hatred. The battle began, a struggle of will and faith against an ancestral evil. Each step they took in the dream world was like crossing a minefield of painful memories and unresolved traumas. Min faced his own weaknesses, confronting each horrible vision with courage he didn't know he possessed. Dr. Parker, guided by the ancient wisdom of the shamans, cast spells and incantations that burned like fire against the darkness. The entity fought with growing fury, its attacks becoming more intense as they neared victory. But Min did not retreat. He found a strength within himself he never knew existed, his strength fueled by the hope of a future free from the terror that plagued his community. Finally, in a moment of pure determination and sacrifice, Min and Dr. Parker managed to seal the entity back into the shadows from which it came. The nightmare ended, and the community could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The sun rose on a new day, bringing with it a sense of peace they had not felt in a long time. But the scars from the battle remained. Min looked round, seeing tired faces, but now with a spark of hope in their eyes. They had faced evil together and emerged stronger than before. The experience had united them, transforming fear into courage and despair into resolve. As Dr. Parker prepared to leave, he knew the fight against evil never really ended. But he had found a new purpose in helping those who faced the darkness, a mission that would guide him for the rest of his life. Min, in turn, looked to the horizon with gratitude and humility. He knew his journey was far from over, but now he was equipped with a new understanding of his own strength and a renewed determination to protect those he loved. So, as the community slowly recovered from the terror that haunted them, Min knew they had found something more valuable than mere peace. They had found the courage to face their own nightmares and emerge victorious on the other side.